The hopes were sky high when the Philadelphia 76ers signed Paul George to a max contract this summer, making the perfect big three centered around Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, with George the missing piece. However, the results have been everything but that to the start of the season, as the Sixers have slipped to 11 games below 500, with Paul George looking like anything but the max player that he's been signed to. I'm going to break down a couple comments that kind of stirred me to wondering if the Sixers made a massive mistake here and how things can still get back on the right track for the Sixers organization as a whole. So let's dive right into things. New to start off with our guy Kendrick Perkins, who started things out in the middle of an absolute trouncing by the Detroit Pistons over the Philadelphia 76ers. I think it was a 30-point lead at halftime. 29-point was the exact number there. And Kendrick Perkins was asked about the direction for the Sixers, and he said, quote, "Trade them both," regarding Joel Embiid and Paul George here. Now, there's been a lot of conversations had. I certainly am near the top of my frustration point with Joel Embiid in the entirety of his career. The lack of availability and the actual production on the floor just not has been to the sky-high MVP standard that we expect from the big fella there. But I do feel like lost in a lot of the shuffle has been the level of play of Paul George. Now, to lay it out exactly for what it has been, he's averaging 16.9 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 1.7 steals, which I do want to give him props for there, shooting 42.5% from the field and 36.9% from three. I'm not saying that Paul George is a bad basketball player, but am I saying he's worth $52 million to be on the floor? I am not. And do I think that these are losses that eat at Paul George, that keep him awake at night? I also don't think that is the case, and that might be a part of the problem here. Now, this tweet is making its rounds on the internet here. Shout out to our guy Sixers Geo, who initially tweeted this out. Paul George, since joining the Philadelphia 76ers, have uploaded 228 podcast clips and 197 field goals. That's a tough look all around here. Now, I'm not going to be the guy to super rag on it. And if we're being completely honest here, it's not like Paul George is the guy directly uploading the podcast clips himself. I'm sure he has a whole team that works with it, as well as shout out to Dallas Rutherford and all the rest of the podcast crew that do work on that. But, dude, come on, man. Let's get a little serious here. I think it's more podcast uploads than I've had. And this is a guy who makes $52 million playing basketball. I got a full-time job myself, but I make a whole lot less than that. And I cannot believe that is where the priorities are falling for Paul George here. Now, to get the train back on the tracks for this video and speak about it from a basketball perspective here, to be completely fair to Paul George, the root of the Sixers' issues have not been his fault. That it has been the lack of availability for Joel Embiid, and when he has been on the floor, it has not been to those standards. Averaging 24.7 points per game, 8.1 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shooting 45.9% from the field, 32.1% from beyond the three-point arc there. And Embiid is very clearly the foundation of this Sixers team. But there's a couple telling quotes that are beginning to make their rounds around the internet at this point, around the media circles here. I did break down my thoughts on why I thought Tyrese Maxey is stepping up as a leader and a face of the franchise in a way that Joel Embiid really never has with the Sixers team in a previous video here. But to address Paul George and how he ties into this, it does feel like he's getting a lot of the free pass here. Now, to dive into a couple other things that I did want to pull up, we have the podcast clip stuff here. We also got this interesting quote from Daryl Morey, which I do think changed my perspective on things a little bit. And this being the first time that Morey faced the media, had an opportunity to speak regarding how the trade deadline go. We all know the state of the season where the Sixers are at, and Daryl Morey was asked his priorities at the deadline. And he said, quote, "We wanted to get younger, get more dynamic, both now and in the future," with his moves at the deadline. That is really interesting because signing Paul George is the opposite of all of those things there. He's older. None of those are qualifying for Paul George specifically. But that did bring me to the conclusion of what is next for the Sixers team, because you have signed this contract. This is something that is not going away. And to dive into the cap specifics of what is going on, you can see the multi-year breakdown. That Joel Embiid and Paul George are not going anywhere. Now, the way to make this right from a Sixers perspective, I'm going to break down the short-term and long-term. To start short-term, unfortunately, this is your bed that you made. You got to sleep in it at this point. You got to figure out what the best-case scenario for this possible season is. For Daryl Morey specifically, that he has spoken quite openly about, he believes that we, quote, "We're just focused on winning a championship." And I know you have to squint a little, but we feel like this group can do it. And while I think that is a ridiculously optimistic lens and that there's pretty much zero chance that is in the cards for this season, what I do think is valuable is seeing what the actual ceiling is. This team should get into a battle-tested situation where you are in that crucial stretch, down the home stretch of the regular season, trying to fight your way into the playoffs. Maybe you make it into the play-in, which I still think is more likely than not at this point, and see what they can do when the stakes are that high. You got to figure out if there is a pulse from this team. But to be completely honest here, My sense is that there's not. There are individuals that care on this Sixers team, but as a whole, do I think this Sixers team cares or has the effort, has that championship DNA? I don't think that is the case. So if that is the situation, then we're starting to talk about some serious changes this offseason. I don't know what the market is for Joel Embiid. I don't know what the market is for Paul George, but we just saw guys like Luka Doncic, like Anthony Davis flipped at this trade deadline, and it does make me wonder if Daryl Morey starts to explore those opportunities. But the bottom line is, you still made this contact here. You still made this contract here, that you have Paul George on the books for this amount of money, and either a team is going to take that, and at the minimum, you have to get that amount of value back, and that is where the Sixers are in a tough space here. Now, when looking about Joel Embiid specifically, did want to circle back to him because this is where it starts and ends for me. If there's a belief that Joel Embiid will be the future part of the Sixers team, that he remains the centerpiece of this franchise, that is where Paul George is connected to him. That those two, I see the timelines correlated far more than I think is the next piece. With the Tyrese Maxey, who's 24 years old, Jared McCain, who's only 20 years old, Justin Edwards, that next generation, there is an intriguing amount of young talent. I do want to tip the cap to Daryl Morey directly because that's not the easiest thing to do, is to rebuild that up as you're trying to contend currently. I do think he's done a really nice job of adding some role players, and I think he has crushed it through the draft. Even guys like Ricky Council IV, while he is gone to this point, guys like Paul Reed, guys like Isaiah Joe, that there have been some slam dunk picks. And let's not forget Adem Bona, who's still sticking around this organization and clearly has the signs of being a long-term positive backup center. So Daryl has done a nice job of kind of stocking the assets and adding this young talent. But that does not change the fact that when you look at how this roster is constructed, so much is tied up in those top three contracts with Joel Embiid, with Tyrese Maxey, and with Paul George. With Paul George and Embiid really carrying the lion's share, both them making $50 million plus per year. We've seen across the NBA, teams have essentially zagged on that conversation of this big three, that there was this trend in the NBA. But with these new CBA repercussions, it's clear that not a lot of teams are committing to that, and it does make you wonder exactly why. Now, granted, the Sixers have done everything possible to keep their flexibility, ducking the tags, getting under the first apron to create some opportunities in the buyout market, and however they want to package this and present it to us. The bottom line here is, a lot of this Sixers team is fully decided on what that big three can bring. And the reality is, it does not look like the answer to that is what we want to hear. So for Paul George specifically, the only thing that he can do is kind of ball out from here. You got to figure out, you got to earn your money. You got to show what you can actually do on the floor. We know who Paul George is as a basketball player. He's a future Hall of Famer, a guy that has been around for quite some time. There was a point in time when this dude was straight up cold, going toe-to-toe with LeBron James with the Pacers uniform on his back. But I don't think that is the version of Paul George that exists anymore. And again, in complete fairness to him, it's been a tough season for him too. He's battled 2 bone bruises in his knee. He's still dealing with some ligament damage in his pinky finger on his non-shooting hand. I do think it's making him tentative, and that's incredibly frustrating to me because, brother, it's a pinky. Like, we've all been there if we've played basketball, of jamming your finger, and I get if it's ligament damage, it's a little bit deeper there. But having a pinky injury on your non-shooting hand is kind of crazy to me that it seems to be throwing him off to this level. But you can see it when you watch the games, man. He's grabbing his pinky after plays. He's holding on. He's got some sort of little splint or wrap on it. So it's clear that is impacting him. But if that is impacting him and the expectation is that's going to carry on for 6 weeks, that basically takes you up to about the playoffs to that point. So this is just the version of Paul George that we have on the Sixers roster. So for the short term, I do think Daryl Morey is going to be in hardcore evaluation mode. It would not shock me whatsoever if he's attempting to pull the plug on this big three experiment this summer. But this is the bed that was made. They have to sleep on it, and hopefully they can scrounge some sort of life, some sort of, I guess, cohesiveness for playing together for a stretch of time. But the reality is, it has been about as ugly as possible to start this season, and Paul George, I don't think, has gotten necessarily the amount of blame that really should be the case for this. He has not been the problem, but he sure as hell has not been the solution, and I did expect far more as far as a floor of what his play is. I understand he's a complimentary star, built to play next to Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, but there has to be points where when you're the guy, you can still step up and be the guy. There's a reason that this organization moved on from Tobias Harris. There's a reason that they have cycled through these, turnstile of co-stars, the Jimmy Butlers, the James Hardens. They've been searching for the right mix, and in theory, you are that guy. But in reality, that just has not been the case, and I do wonder if they're going to have to backtrack pretty hard on that in the near future. I do hope that Paul George directly makes me eat my words. There's still some season left to play. The playoffs are when things will matter the most, assuming they can get to that stage. But boy, I thought the floor for what he could bring to the Sixers team was higher than has been the case, and obviously we're seeing what is playing out right now. So let me know what you guys think in the comments as far as the future of Paul George. Do you subscribe to the theory of Kendrick Perkins that it is time to start exploring other options, or do you say see it through? Let's see what happens. Let's see what goes down for the coming years. This is just 1 year of a 4-year deal. Let me know where your guys' brains are at right now, but I'm as sick as I have been about both the Joel Embiid and Paul George experiences, and I did not think I'd be getting here at this point in the season. So drop those comments below. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys for listening to this video here. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like, and I'll be back talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.